this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
We spend hours deciding what to buy, but there's a split-second decision that can make or break a sale. Do you have the trust to hit buy now? Agentic commerce is testing that moment more than ever. And that's where PayPal comes in. With 25 years of checkouts, 400 million consumer accounts globally, and the benefit of purchase and seller protection, all of which make sure wherever a purchase starts, it ends with trust. Built for payments, growth, and agentic. PayPal Open, built for all business. Visit paypalopen.com.
Purchase and seller protections on eligible transactions only. Terms apply. See paypal.com/risk-management for details.
When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Aging is real, and so are the benefits of adding Vital Proteins collagen peptides to your daily routine. Because around the age of 30, your body needs backup to keep your collagen up to help support healthy hair, skin, nails, bones, and joints. Available in the classic collagen peptides, collagen and protein shakes, and new Vital Proteins collagen sparkling waters, so you can stay vital, stay you. Visit vitalproteins.com to learn more and where to buy. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Pushkin. In 2015, Western Indonesia and Singapore were covered in toxic black smoke.
I had family living in Singapore and they couldn't breathe for months. It was just billowing black peat smoke.
Tim Sahai is a climate policy expert at Johns Hopkins. We talked to him last episode. Like everyone else living in Singapore at the time, his family was living in hazy smoke for months. The culprit wasn't a forest fire. It was, well, in a way, kind of everything we've been talking about this season. The U.S. had passed laws incentivizing corn ethanol. So all the corn that used to be used for corn oil in cooking was being used for ethanol instead. The world needed a replacement for cheap cakes and cookies, and it found it in palm oil. Throughout the early 2000s, much of the rainforests of Borneo were replaced with palm oil plantations. And plantation owners would use fire to quickly clear the rainforest. Then that fire would spread to dried out peatland, which can burn underground for weeks.
You ended up with vast underground peat fires in Indonesia that you just couldn't put out. You just couldn't put them out. So they're just billowing it all out, right? And 1 billion tons of CO2 were produced.
From June to October 2015, about 2.5 million hectares of Indonesia burned. When Tim sees what's happening now with corn ethanol in the US and Brazil, he thinks about what his family members went through in Singapore.
So if you grow soybean oil, for example, or you grow corn oil, and you say, okay, great, this thing is awesome and green. And now everybody starts to make sort of more corn oil. And that can sort of cause the displacement of land that was previously growing something else. And so then the question becomes, how do you count that displaced amount of land into your accounting methods?
Meaning there's a domino effect to growing more corn for fuel. In Mato Grosso, where Bruce Rastetter and his Brazilian business partners, Marino Franz, Paulo Franz, and Miguel Vaz Ribeiro, have driven a massive corn boom, we've seen displacement of a bunch of other kinds of agriculture and vegetation, not to mention a whole lot more pollution. In the US, the Environmental Protection Agency used to require that businesses account for this kind of impact. It was called land use and land use change.
This sounds terribly dull and everybody's ears and eyes like immediately glaze over. But you and I know that this has enormous, absolutely transformational, in fact, horrific impacts upon the world, right? So in the 2007 sort of renewable fuel mandate, which is what created this enormous boom of corn ethanol in America, well, what happened?
That's the renewable fuel standard that you heard Bruce Rastetter asking U.S. politicians about in the last episode.
Let's talk about the RFS, renewable fuels. Next subject, the RFS.
Ag industry-backed politicians in the U.S. Congress fought to get rid of the requirement to account for land use change.
The cheapest oil that was used for your cakes and for your cookies, basically stopped becoming corn oil because corn oil prices went up, because corn's demand went up. And so, well, what's going to be the cheapest oil became the question. And lo and behold, that answer, instead of corn oil, became displaced into palm oil. And palm oil is one of the most horrifically ecologically damaging things that happened was Indonesian rainforests were razed to the ground between 2007 and the next 15 years in the forests of Sumatra, Borneo, particularly Borneo, and those rainforests were razed to the ground and replaced with palm oil plantations.
So the corn ethanol boom in the U.S., driven by policies that industrial ag business lobbied for, all under a giant green renewable fuels banner, increased the cost of food and created one of the world's biggest ecological disasters and carbon dioxide emitters in less than 10 years.
It's just one of the most sort of shocking sort of features of what happens if you don't take into account that displaced land effect.
Now, ag businessmen are pushing for similar policies in Brazil.
That's right, Amy. When the government started to regulate where sugarcane for ethanol could be grown, corn ethanol entrepreneurs saw an opportunity. Here's Lucas Ferrante, the biologist at the National Institute for Amazonian Research that we heard from last time.
A gente precisa lembrar sempre que cultivo ele desloca outro para outro lugar.
People have to remember that one crop displaces another to an area that will be deforested. We have a finite amount of land. And if we're introducing a new crop, and all of the crops we have are expanding rapidly, where are the crops that made way for the sugarcane plantations going?
Again, when policies or the market encourage the expansion of a particular crop, that means whatever else was happening on that land that it expands to, whether it was undeveloped land or planted with a different crop, is impacted.
Quando as plantações de cana-de-açúcar começaram a se expandir, alguns outros cultivos, principalmente pecuários...
When sugarcane plantations began to expand, some of the crops, especially livestock farming, expanded significantly, particularly at the border between the Cerrado and the Atlantic forest. So there was massive deforestation. Then, back in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, since sugarcane plantations were causing so much deforestation, a decree was issued by President Lula prohibiting their expansion into the Amazon and the Pantanal. The intention was very good because it prevented high demand for a new crop from causing the degradation of that biome. However, the problem we need to remember is that the demand was for biofuels, not necessarily for sugarcane. We need a ban on crops for biofuel production in these biomes, not just on sugarcane crops.
So a well-intended environmental regulation led not only to more deforestation to plant corn, but also to the embrace of a new type of ethanol that everyone already knew was less efficient.
Corn
isn't advantageous for biofuel production. Sugarcane is much more efficient. Corn is only being used because of the ban on sugarcane.
That's right again. And while we've been focused on one particular company and their approach this season, it is far from the only one. The problem is systemic. We've seen corn ethanol spread not just from the US to Brazil, but also from Brazil's Midwest to other parts of the country. More than half the new corn ethanol plants being built in Brazil today are outside of Mato Grosso. Green colonialism isn't green at all, of course. It's just regular old colonialism with better marketing. But why has it been so easy for fake green solutions to take root and spread? I'm Felipe Sabrina with Intercept Brazil.
And I'm Amy Westervelt with Drilled. Great question, Felipe, especially since it's been far easier for these supposed solutions to take hold than real environmental solutions. Even when there are so many examples of them causing new and sometimes worse environmental problems.
Especially when those solutions, like reducing consumption and energy use, run counter to capitalism's model of endless growth. Today, in our final episode, the bigger systemic problem that Bruce and the guys represent.
Welcome to the final episode of Carbon Cowboys.
Cowboys do Cerrado.
After the break, the 3 C's: capitalism, colonialism, and climate change.
If your business runs on 5 different apps, 12 browser tabs, and one spreadsheet that everyone's afraid to touch, it's probably time for Odoo. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that connects every part of your business into one powerful, easy-to-use platform. So instead of wasting time switching between disconnected systems, your entire business works together in real time. Your team moves faster, your data stays accurate, and you can actually focus on growing your business. Let one unified system run your entire business. From the first opportunity to the final payment, everything works together in one place. Whether you're a small business or managing a large operation, Odoo gives you one flexible platform built to grow with you. Try for free today at odoo.com/iHeartRadio. That's odoo.com/iHeartRadio.
Running a small business means every hire matters. A bad hire can cost you time, money, and momentum. A good hire, they can help grow your business. But finding great talent isn't easy, especially when you don't have the time or resources to sift through piles of resumes to find the right fit. That's why LinkedIn built Hiring Pro, your new hiring partner that screens candidates for you, so instead of sorting through applications, you spend your time talking to candidates who are actually a good fit. You know what this makes me think of? My beloved Boston Celtics. 3 years ago, they chose a new coach, Joe Mazzulla, who was like the 3rd or 4th assistant off the bench, never had any NBA coaching experience. Everyone was expecting him to fail. And you know what? Turns out he was one of the best coaches in the game. And without him, there's no way the team would have made the playoffs this year, let alone be contenders for the finals. Sometimes the right hire makes all the difference. With Hiring Pro, you can hire with confidence, knowing you're getting the best talent for your business. In fact, those hiring with LinkedIn are 24% less likely to need to reopen a role within 12 months compared to the leading competitor. Join the 2.7 million small businesses using LinkedIn to hire. Get started by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/Pushkin. Terms and conditions apply. We spend hours researching products online and deciding what to buy, but there's a split-second decision that can make or break a sale. Do you have the trust to hit the buy now button? The way we discover and compare things is evolving, happening faster and influenced by new forms of intelligent advice. But the underlying trust question doesn't go away. If anything, it's more important than ever. That's where PayPal comes in. For more than 25 years, they've been a trusted way to pay. And now PayPal can make the agentic era of commerce work for merchants, letting them maintain control of their brand, their customer relationships, so even as the way we shop changes, the moment that matters most still feels familiar and deeply dependable. Built for payments, growth, and agentic. PayPal Open, built for all business. Visit paypalopen.com to get started.
Purchase and seller protections on eligible transactions only. Terms apply. See paypal.com/risk-management for details.
Some political economists trace capitalism back to just the industrial age. But in certain countries, the US and Brazil, for example, you have to start earlier, and it starts with agriculture.
In feudal Europe, a critical mass point was hit in the 14th century when the Little Ice Age arrived. And from there, a great wave of peasant revolts defeated Europe's feudal ruling classes.
That's environmental historian Jason Moore. He co-authored the book, A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things. It's about the way that capitalism has devalued nature and humanity. The Little Ice Age lasted from 1300 to 1850. Scientists call it little because it only impacted the northern hemisphere, where temperatures dropped by a little more than half a degree. Side note, that half a degree brought forth a complete societal revolution. So people who say a degree or two of warming is no big deal might want to study this history.
And to make a very long and complex story short, those ruling classes had to find a way to find riches and power because they had been defeated in the countryside of Western Europe.
To do that, they had to look elsewhere, to other parts of the world where they might be able to acquire land and with it, cheap labor. The Portuguese Empire, which eventually colonizes Brazil, is the first in the world to colonize land outside its realm, beginning with the island of Madeira. The Spanish Empire reaches the Americas first and immediately begins capturing and enslaving indigenous people. Moore says there's a specific way they're able to justify this.
Nature enters into the vernacular at this point to mean not human. And, oh, by the way, most human beings who work for a living are put into the realm of nature. Women become the savages of Europe, as Silvia Federici reminds us. The language of savagery, wildness, barbarism comes directly out of the English experience in Ireland, where the English learned how to practice genocide, which they then extend to the rest of the world. The Spaniards go and reorganize colonial Peru, and in the process redefine indigenous peoples as naturales, as part of nature.
It's at this point that we get the whole man versus nature frameworks that we still hear from industrial agriculture today. This idea that it's man's job to dominate nature and extract from it.
That message gets emphasized by religion. Here's just one example from the preacher at the Baptist church in Sorriso, one of the towns near Lucas in Mato Grosso.
Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image. They will be like us. They will rule." Repeat after me. They will rule. Over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the domestic animals, over the wild animals, over all the creatures of the earth, and over the creatures that crawl on the ground.
Right. And Christianity intersects with not just colonialism and capitalism, but with the evolution of private property and agriculture too, helped along by the idea that Christians are more civilized and evolved than indigenous peoples.
Right. The doctrine of discovery gives Christians the right to take any land occupied by non-Christians.
And the philosophical musings of John Locke suggest that land should be owned by those who can improve it by doing things like cutting down trees, planting crops, raising animals, and building homes. This further justifies taking land from indigenous people because they quote unquote aren't using it. And from there, it's just endless expansion. But at a certain point, colonists, they run out of land. That happens in the U.S. in the 1930s.
Between World War I and World War II. That was the moment when there was no more land to settle.
David Correa is a historical geographer at the University of New Mexico. He says in this moment, just before World War II, the U.S. makes a turn toward industrialization because that's the only way to keep expanding once the physical option of more land is no longer available.
So this is the age of like new immigration restrictions, the industrialization of agriculture. It's the moment that like hybrid corn is invented, which dramatically increases yields.
Aha, there it is, corn. So the very first steps the U.S. takes in the direction of industrialized agriculture is in the cornfield.
It's also like we can improve plants, we can improve people, right? So that this is the rise of eugenics. And their solution was convert the settler strategy of constant expansion into a different, the same strategy, but the expansion will happen like at a genetic level. So like we'll expand the genetic capacity of plants and the genetic capacity of people. So it's the same thing of expansion. This is where the field of genetics is born. It actually starts in a cornfield, where they're working on corn. So it's not an accident that it's a native crop that they focus all their energy on.
First, you take indigenous land to improve it. Then you take an indigenous crop, corn, which had been grown by native people in what is now the United States for 5,000 years before colonizers arrived, and modernize it.
And you know what, Emmy? This sounds very familiar to us. In Brazil, agriculture has always been tied to two words: colonialism and exports. Another long and complicated story. But ever since the Portuguese colonized the country, our economic cycles have been built around huge landholdings and monoculture crops looking to the international markets. The idea of agricultural modernization, though, the one that fascinates people like Bruce and his business partners, is much more recent. It took off in the late 1960s, inspired, believe it or not, by the US model. That's when the machines arrived, along with pesticides, genetically modified seeds, and everything that came with them.
Yes, exactly. So when Bruce talks about what attracted him to Brazil, he always talks about how open the country is to US technology.
Green colonialism is like the next phase of that expansion.
It's the country that most readily accepts US technology outside of the US.
Foi a destruição ecológica.
It was the ecological destruction caused by colonialism that, centuries ago, beginning in the mid-17th century, gave rise to a colonial concern for environmental preservation.
Breno Bringel is a political science and sociology professor at the Institute of Social and Political Studies at the State University of Rio de Janeiro, and an editor of the book Green Colonialism, Volume 1, Geopolitics and Socio-Ecological Transitions. He doesn't argue with the idea that decarbonization and energy transition are critical to addressing the climate crisis. But he says green colonialism isn't doing any of that.
Essa nova face do colonialismo verde.
This new face of green colonialism is essentially reproducing the dynamics of historical colonialism, seeking new social legitimacy around the idea of decarbonization. Because who would be against decarbonization? That's the question.
Right. It's a genius way to justify continued expansion, but market it as something else entirely.
Exactly. Bringel points out that when it just continues to commodify nature, this new green colonialism narrative is exactly the same as regular old colonialism.
Quando a descarbonização se traduz.
When decarbonization primarily translates into carbon offset markets, investment in technologies that perpetuate inequalities, or increased production of green raw materials without social justice and without environmental justice, it becomes a channel for accumulation and the reproduction of green colonialism.
Sylvia Secchi, an economist, geographer, and professor at University of Iowa, said something similar about how industrial agriculture approaches sustainability in the U.S.
The goal is just to farm the government. This is what these people excel at, really farming the government and just kind of like coming up with the narrative that will carry the day, right? And then without any compunction, just switching to another narrative when the next narrative wins the day.
And here we're going to come back to Bruce Rastetter.
Rastetter has clearly been instrumental in promoting and supporting and navigating and shaping the reinvention of ethanol and carbon capture and storage. All these things are integral to this reimagining of ethanol as a long-term, renewable, sustainable fuel. It's putting lipstick on a pig.
Luquinha. And in fact, FS Fueling Sustainability, Bruce Rastetter's Brazilian company, has been doing the same thing. In addition to helping to start both the corn ethanol and carbon capture industries in Brazil and pushing for the policies that will help them grow, FS has been a pioneer in what are called green bonds.
Yes, green bonds really exploded when the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. That agreement often gets pointed to as this great step forward for climate, and in some ways it was, but it also leaned really hard on the idea of involving the private sector more in solving climate. and especially on the idea that financializing environmental gains was going to be this huge lever of progress. We just needed to reform the carbon offsets and credit markets to make sure those gains were real. On the sidelines of Paris, global investors even signed their own agreement called the Paris Green Bond Statement. I don't know about you, Felipe, but I'm not a big finance bro.
No, me neither. So we called up Vanessa Parreira Perim at the Federal University of São Carlos. She wrote a whole paper on green bonds in Brazil, and she walked us through it.
Uma corporação, estado, parte do estado, né? Pode ser município, pode
a corporation, a government, or a branch of the government, like a municipality or an agency, for example, the BNDES, needs money to carry out a certain activity. So it goes out to raise funds directly from investors. So it issues this document, this debt security, and then it's presented to these investors. So, but why is it green, right? It's green because it goes through certain stages to establish credibility. A green bond has to have its funds allocated exclusively to projects, activities, or even assets, like a power plant, for example, that will generate ecological benefits, right? So yeah, it has to be environmentally sustainable.
Vanessa says part of Brazil's openness to U.S. technology is that technological approaches are viewed by financial markets as things that stabilize agriculture and make it a good investment. There are a lot of variables in agriculture, right? There are funguses and bugs and extreme weather. Chemicals and machines are seen as a way to control those variables. Today's version of the man versus nature thing.
So the finance market in general created all these tools to support a certain type of modernized agriculture. That expansion that Correa talked about. And the green bond market provided the financing for green colonialism.
We see this movement beginning in the early 2000s, where we see how agreements are starting to emerge that aim to channel private capital into initiatives that can support sustainable development projects, right?
To issue a green bond, you have to go through 4 procedures. First, you write up a framework.
The Brazilian government, for example, has a framework. Yeah, and then in that framework, they need to specify where they'll allocate the funds they'll receive. And it has to be for eligible projects.
Then you have to describe the sustainability of the activities you'll use the green bond for.
There's a third step, that is, how it will be monitored over time, right? During the period it's receiving these green bond proceeds, this green bond money, this investment.
But again, monitored by the company, which also reports on their progress.
And
then there's a fourth step, which is how they're going to, disclose this data. So it's basically declaratory, right? Like, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. I'm going to monitor it this way, and I'm going to report it that way.
When they first came about in 2007, and for around the first decade of their existence, green bonds were mostly issued by international development banks, like the World Bank. But beginning in 2016, on the heels of the Paris Climate Accord, more corporations and governments started to get in on the action, and the market exploded. By 2020, the green bond market was approaching $300 billion. And just 2 years later, by 2022, it had ballooned to $2 trillion. Various methods have been developed to verify the environmental gains funded by green bonds, and our friends at FS have embraced a lot of them. But Vanessa says it's more about paperwork and self-reporting than actually verifying environmental benefits.
O Estado não precisa participar, né, dessa regulamentação, da verificação. Ele mesmo vai...
The idea is that the government doesn't need to be involved in this regulation or verification process. It will self-regulate by dividing the stakeholders into different groups, right? The term they use is stakeholders, and they'll monitor each other in some way. So you have the issuer there, they're the first stakeholder. Then you have a second party, which are SPOs, second party opinions, which are companies that provide consulting in the environmental, engineering, and management fields. And they're the ones who will actually evaluate a green bond. And then you have third parties that are institutions, for example, like the CBI, the Climate Bonds Initiative, which are, well, generally nonprofit associations or organizations, in the case of the CBI, where they create standards, right? So they establish benchmarks for what is considered a sustainable activity, right?
So the verifications are really more about financial compliance than anything that's happening on the ground or in the atmosphere. In Brazil, that means that things like land grabbing and excessive agrochemical use are not factored into the equation. Now, various actors in Brazil's government with close ties to agribusiness are trying to present the majority of agricultural production in Brazil as green.
Então, muita coisa vai ficar de fora, né? E o próprio monitoramento...
So a lot of things are going to get left out, right? And the monitoring itself, well, since it's self-regulated, it ends up being very declarative. So yeah, there won't be that level of care. Like, no one will go there for a field visit for a while, to actually talk to people, to analyze what that project is generating locally, right? If we're talking about soybeans and corn, it's not just what the processing plant, for example, is producing. It has several suppliers. How do you keep track of what each of these grain suppliers is doing in terms of land use and deforestation?
In Brazil, soybean giant Amaggi and cattle conglomerate JBS, for example, have tapped the green bond market.
Which brings us to the latest news from FS. In May 2026, as we were putting the finishing touches on this podcast, Amaggi, the soybean company owned by former Minister of Agriculture and Livestock Blairo Maggi and his family, purchased a 40% stake in FS. Bruce Hasteter retains the controlling stake with 43%, and the remaining 17% of the company is divided amongst Hasteter's Brazilian business partners. You might remember Blairo Maggi was the politician who gave a speech at the opening of FS's first corn ethanol plant in Mato Grosso. The deal was approved by the government. Amaggi took on more than $700 million in debt to finance the acquisition, prompting financial analysts to issue warnings about the company being over-leveraged. But according to Vanessa, these figures aren't actually that high, given the amount of capital they are able to raise through green bonds. FS itself had already raised $700 million through these bonds. And in 2021, Amaggi raised $750 million in green bonds to finance a small hydroelectric plant near indigenous lands that was far from sustainable.
E tinha, no caso da Amaggi, título verde. E foi aí que eu fui atrás de
They raised $750 million from foreign investors very quickly. It was more than they expected, and it was for a series of projects. One of the projects was the construction of a power plant. If you look at the plant and the technology, you might say, look, clean energy, it's green and sustainable. But if you put it in context, in a region that has so many power plants in the same watershed, then you see it's not really that sustainable anymore. That's obviously going to create problems for the river's own wildlife, for the communities living in the surrounding area. That doesn't factor into the analysis of a green bond, right? It doesn't belong there.
You know, Felipe, something that I think is really important for listeners to understand here, too, is that this whole infinite growth thing, it continues no matter who is running the government. Like in the US, it was Biden that increased the incentives for carbon capture and biofuels. And now in Brazil, it's Lula who's supporting the corn ethanol boom.
And it reminds me of something Corey Melby, the American agriculture consultant in Brazil, said about agribusinessmen in both the US and Brazil, that they really have no ideology beyond business.
When you think of how conservatives of the past, pro-constitution, land rights, property rights were sacrosanct. But as soon as it goes against their pipeline, they're not conservatives anymore either. They're business, period. And it's the same in Brazil. You got some of the biggest farmers in Mato Grosso that are pro-Lula at the moment. Who would think that? He's pro-little guy, pro-small farmer. And you've got the Maggis and the Schaefers of the world all lining up behind Lula for another term. And bringing Supreme Court justices out to the middle of Mato Grosso and giving them a town and a little village in their name.
Yes, exactly. I've also been thinking about something Tim Sahai said in our interview. I was asking him about why anyone would support corn ethanol in Brazil when it's so clearly not even the best crop for ethanol.
From a neutral scientific perspective, sugarcane ethanol has lower carbon intensity. It's just cleaner. Just use that. Don't use corn.
I asked Sylvia Secchi about whether carbon capture or BECCS, that's bioenergy with carbon capture, like what FS is doing in Brazil, makes any of this any better.
So here's what I think. I think that the problem is that very often people don't take a systems perspective and they don't consider opportunity costs, right? So to me, BECCS is the latest flavor of tech fix, right? Which is sprinkled with some nice glittery sustainability and renewable kind of sugar-based stars or whatever. We're talking about creating massive infrastructure to support a fossil fuel dependent type of markets, right? So it's not scalable. It really is complementary, not substitute with fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine technology. It's extremely expensive.
And I get why corn growers would be super into all of it because it just keeps their business going. But why do the people who keep saying that the climate crisis is urgent and they want to act on it, people like Biden and Lula, for example, why do they keep going along with it? And why is there such an acceptance, even from scientists and advocates, that we'll never be able to do the quote-unquote neutral scientific thing?
Probably because it would be the final limit to capitalism's endless accumulation.
Right, because it's a planetary limit, really. And that's an idea industry and the governments it supports have been fighting for a really long time.
Right. But the people who want to make real progress on climate need to stop fighting it.
Yeah, that seems like a good place to start, right? And to end this season, thanks, Felipe. It's been an absolute honor to work with you on this, and Alice and Marcia and everyone else on the team in Brazil. Obrigada.
Thanks, Emmy. It was a great honor and a pleasure for me as well. I've learned a lot from you and from all of you who make Drilled what it is. Thank you very much.
Yay!
We reached out to Bruce Rastetter, Harold Hamm, the Franz brothers, Miguel Vaz Ribeiro, and all summit companies and Brazilian government agencies mentioned in this season for comment and have incorporated any responses we received throughout the season.
Carbon Cowboys, Cowboys of the Cerrado is a collaboration between Drilled and The Intercept Brazil.
The show was reported and written by Felipe Sabrina and me, Amy Westervelt.
Our editors are Audrey Quinn in the US and Alice de Souza in Brazil.
Our senior producer and sound designer is Martin Zaltz-Ostwick. Audio production and sound design in Brazil by Marcia Reverdosa and Felipe Mux.
Theme song and original music by Eric Terena.
Additional music by Martin Zaltz-Ostwick. Our engineer is Peter Duff.
Artwork for Drilled is by Matt Fleming.
U.S. fact-checking from Naomi Barr.
Brazil fact-checking by Estúdio Fronteira.
Our First Amendment attorney is James Wheaton with the First Amendment Project. We are also proud members of Reporters Shield. Big thanks also to Andrew Fishman, president of The Intercept Brazil.
Drilled is distributed by Pushkin Industries.
Huge thanks to the team there, including Greta Cohen, Eric Sandler, Grace Ross, Morgan Ratner, Owen Miller, Kira Posey, Jordan McMillan, Brian Schreberneck, and Jake Flanagan. To hear the Portuguese version of this series, head over to The Intercept Brazil's site or search for The Intercept Brazil's podcast feed wherever you listen to podcasts.
Running a business shouldn't feel like surviving a software group project. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together, from sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, all in one powerful platform. No messy integrations, no bouncing between tabs. And best of all, no spreadsheets. Stop managing software and start managing your business with one unified system. Try for free today at odoo.com/iHeartRadio. That's odoo.com/iHeartRadio.
Hey everyone, it's Cal Penn. I'm inviting you to join the best-sounding book club you've ever heard with my podcast, Hearsay, the Audible and iHeart Audiobook Club. Every episode, I nerd out with amazing guests and dive into the best new audiobooks available on Audible. It's the book club for your ears. Listen to Hearsay, the Audible and iHeart Audiobook Club on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Paramount Plus is now the home of all your BET favorites.
What? Yes!
With all new episodes of Tyler Perry's Divorce Sisters.
You've always liked a little drama.
Plus a whole new world of movies like Gladiator 2.
Now I will control an empire.
Original series like The Chi.
Just make sure we protect each other.
And live sports like UFC.
Welcome to the history books!
New home, same family. Your BET favorites are now on Paramount Plus. Subscribe now.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.